What's going on, guys? Joe from SRHQ. Today I thought I would share with you my small but growing collection of electricians' knives. These are sometimes referred to as Lineman knives, as well as TL-29s. Now, TL-29 is a military nomenclature. It stands for Tool Lineman number 29. I assume number 29 refers to the frame, and this is a designated lineman or electrician's knife. These were military issued. They have a long history. They date back all the way to World War I. They're descendants of the original Signal Corps knives. Camillus was the very first company contracted to make these knives, but lots, and I mean lots of other companies made these knives as well. I have three companies represented here on the table. I have a Camillus, a Queen, and a Boker USA. All very cool knives, very useful pattern, I would say. I've heard this knife being referred to by many as the best knife ever, the greatest knife of all times. And these are also very sentimental knives. It seems that anyone that has had one of these knives and has had extended use on these knives always have some really cool stories to tell about things they did with this knife. There are a lot of cool stories online. I will post one in the description below. I found it very amusing. I'm not going to give it away, but it's a story of revenge. It involves a huge jerk of a landlord, an aggravated tenant, a TL-29 knife, and the newly invented electric car door opener. So I'll leave it at that. If you guys want to check it out, definitely worth the read. Cool little short story. But yeah, let's get into this and see why this knife has been so popular. First off, the size is great. 3¼ inch or 3 3/4 inch handle, 2 3/4 inch blade. That's the same for all three of these on the table. Some of the earlier models were a little bit smaller on 3½ inch frames. All of these have Delrin covers, these two having black smooth Delrin, and the Boker has saw cut Delrin, which I think looks pretty cool. The older models, the original models, would have had wooden handles. Now, some of these are marked with TL-29 on the covers. Some aren't. Some people think that if it's marked with TL-29, it was military issue. And if it's not marked with TL-29, it is a civilian issued knife. From my research, I found that to be false. I've heard from lots of military people that were issued this knife during their time in the military that got knives without the TL-29. So it can be a loose reference. I'm pretty sure that if it was marked TL-29 on the cover, it was military issue. But just because it's not marked TL-29 does not mean that it wasn't military issue. So these are two-bladed jackknives. They're on a swell end or a teardrop frame. They're bareheaded. They have nickel silver bolsters. These examples, these two have steel pins. This one has brass pins, brass liners, I think, all around. During the war years, they might have switched to steel liners just because they needed brass for the war effort. But all the ones I have here on the table have brass liners. They all have a spear point master blade, which you can see, it's just a classic spear point blade. Very useful. Just a great utility knife. The spear point blade on all of these will be a slip joint. And then the secondary blade is a locking screwdriver, wire stripper, scraper blade, which is very cool. This is pretty much just a beater blade. From everyone that I've talked to, they use this blade for just about any kind of dirty work that they don't want to ruin their main blade on. But it is a very effective screwdriver. I personally find not a ton of use for a big flathead screwdriver. Most of the screws that I have to deal with are Phillips around here, but I guess historically, flathead screws were more predominant. So we have a brass liner lock. All of these are going to have half stops. Let's just listen to this. Yeah, since so many companies made these, there are just a ton of them out there, and you can find them very inexpensive on eBay or some of the other auction sites. But the cool thing about these knives is all of these are, you know, pretty much American made, or in this case, this one's German made. But they are good quality knives. So if you are just new to the traditional knife hobby, I would highly recommend picking up a TL-29 knife from any of the various manufacturers. They're just really solid little pocket knives. They also all have a bail or a shackle. I can see this being really useful, you know, tying a line on it, putting a chain on it, and somehow attaching it to your person. I think it would really suck if you were a lineman up on top of a telephone pole working around and you dropped your knife and had to go down and get it. So I can definitely see why having a bail or a shackle would be advantageous for the lineman. Show you the tang stamps on the Camillus. We have Camillus, New York, and underneath says USA with 3 dots. Now, from what I've been able to gather, this is the last tang stamp that Camillus USA used. This would have been used between 1989 and 2007. 2007 is when Camillus went bankrupt. So this is a more modern, or a more recent example, I should say. Now this only has 1 visible cover pin. You know, the other ones have 3 pins. Some variations have 4 pins. I'm not sure if that can be used in dating the knife. I would have to look at other examples of the Camillus TL-29 to see if there are different pin configurations or something like that. Nothing on the back, and I don't believe that there is any stamping on the second blade. Yeah, so this is my Camillus TL-29. Now let's take a look at this one. I just recently got this one, and this one, man, this was in rough shape. This was a rust bucket. When I tried to open it, it was so hard and crunchy, I guess is the best word I could use to describe it. But I cleaned it up as well as I could. Maybe I'll put some pictures in and show you guys what it looked like before. Some of the pitting was just so deep that I wasn't able to get that out. But I did make this a usable knife again. I sharpened up the blade. It's nice and sharp. But this one is probably the worst condition of the 3. Let's take a look at the tang stamp. This one has a Q with the crown and like the trailing Q, and then underneath it says USA. Now this one's really tough to date because this tang stamp doesn't appear on the, you know, typical Queen tang stamp chart that's floating around on the internet. The best I could gather were these were 1970s contract knives. Most of the knives in the 1970s have a tang stamp very similar to this, with the only exception being that they list the date next to the Q. I think in 1976 they came out with one that was just with the Q, but it didn't have the USA. So this one has the Q with a long tail on the Q and USA. Yeah, 70s contract knife. That's the best I could come up with. I really like this one. I would have to say, design-wise, I really like the Queen. If you notice, we have rounded bolsters, where on the Camillus and the Boker and most of the other companies that would manufacture this knife would have square bolsters like this. This would be the standard. I actually kind of like the look of the rounded bolster. I also really like the long pull that's on the blade. These are all carbon steel, I believe. I'm not sure what type of carbon steel Queen would have used. This is probably 1095. This is Boker USA, probably also 1095. If it was made in Germany, I'd probably say C75, but I'll get to this. This one's a complicated knife. But yeah, let's just take a look at this. This, like I said, this one was rough. This one had paint on it, scratches all over the covers, rust without end. And yeah, I got it to clean up pretty good. And I actually think the covers look a little bit better now that I worked on them, because there were some little burrs around the Delrin, you know, just machine marks and stuff, and I was able to get all of those off. So it looks like we have one brass pin, 2 steel pins, Here's the back of this knife. This knife actually required quite a bit of surgery. This liner here on the main blade, this side had a huge gap. Still has a pretty decent sized gap. But I repeened this, and what it did, it took this part in a little bit right at the bolster, but it left the gap right underneath. But I did manage to solve some of my blade wobble issues. And you can also see here on the inside liner, there is a bend. So this knife did have some trauma at some point. If you were to take this knife in half, this half with the screwdriver blade is just about perfect. As far as no gaps, everything lines up. The side with the main blade is the problem. Now, I can't blame this on Queen. This knife has obviously gone through some stuff. I see the second side with the screwdriver is very well done. So I'd have to assume that the other side would have originally been just as good. But yeah, this was also covered in rust. Got it cleaned up really nicely. The Queen has a larger bail, as you can see. I guess the Boker has a large bail too, but it's still larger than the Boker bail. So that's cool. I don't really know if that would be an advantage or not, but just something different. Black smooth Delrin, long pulls, love it, half stops. And then here is our screwdriver blade. Very similar to the other two. I'll just get them all open so you can see them all together. So here's the Camillus and the Queen, and then the Queen and the Boker. So all very similar designs, but all very different. They all have this little divot right here, which I couldn't really figure out what the point of that was, but I have some theories. This would be either a sharpened area for scraping, and here is your little area for wire stripping. Now, of course, you have your screwdriver on top. What I think this would be used for, is what I would use it for, is, of course, in use, you can get your finger up there and get a little bit more control. And also on all of these knives where that little cutout is, that's where you access either the long pole in this case or the nail nick in the other two cases. So very cool. Like I said, this is probably my favorite of the three. I just really like the rounded bolsters. I didn't mention, now with this long pull, it could be a little bit difficult to get your thumbnail in there and open it, but Queen went ahead and put a little cutout in there, which isn't present on either of the other two examples. And that's just to help getting your thumbnail in there and opening the blade. Yeah, I mean, this one was in such a rough shape. I'm really happy with how it is now. I mean, just listen to the action. Let's take a look at the main blade. Watch it go into the half stop. Just awesome action. You know, this knife's old, it was beat up, it was covered in rust, but I'm really glad that I could breathe a little bit of new life into it. Now, finally, let's talk about the Boker USA. Like I said before, saw cut Delrin. This one has 2 brass pins, 1 steel pin for the bail. Brass liners, steel back spring. This is just really nicely put together, really nicely finished. I would say out of all of these, if you look at the Camillus, it looks more rough. Everything is not exactly flush here at the back. But if you look at the Boker, it's just definitely a notch above in the fit and finish. Very precise knife. Now, the reason why this knife is confusing, we look at the tang stamp, and it says Boker USA, and this is the last tang stamp that Boker USA would have used up until 1983 when they went bankrupt. Now, if you look here on the blade, the etching says, I don't know if the camera's going to be able to pick it up, Tree Brand made in Germany. So what I've been able to gather is that after Boker USA closed up in '83, they shipped whatever parts they had over to the Solingen factory. And the Solingen factory used those parts from '84 till the late '80s in their blades. So this was built in Germany, in Solingen, but with US parts, if that makes sense. So yeah, we have our main spear point blade, again with the nail nick, half stop, great action. I mean, these knives were really well built. This is probably my favorite screwdriver blade out of all of them. You can see it really has an aggressive grind there for your scraper as well as your wire stripper. Does say something on it. To release, push center lock left. And of course that's referring to the liner lock here. Push it to the left and you can close the blade. So yeah, all really great functional knives. The Queen took a little bit of work to get it to the state that it's in right now, but I'm happy with it. It's going to be one of my users. It's nice and sharpened up, ready to go. So that's going to do it. I just wanted to turn the camera on and show you my collection of electrician's knives. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you got something out of it. Hope you learned something out of it. I'm always looking to learn. If you guys have anything to add, make sure you add it down in the comments below. So thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.